Hello everyone and welcome to the Roadmap for Riding Through Re-Entry webinar. I'm Helen Watts and I'm looking forward to spending the next 60-ish minutes with you and talking about my favourite subject, re-entry. I'm hoping you'll go away from this webinar more at ease with the stage of re-entry that you're at and with some tools to go on making your lives easier. If you've not been on one of these webinars before, please feel free to sign in with live fire so that you can participate in the chat at the bottom of your screen. You just need to press the sign up button and you'll be able to put in a name and an email address. It's free, so then you'll be able to participate in tonight's event. Do go ahead and do that so that I know that you're here, and let me know that you can hear me and see the PowerPoint that I've loaded up. While we're waiting for a few more folk to join in, please do make sure you've got a pen and a paper to hand so you can write down the things that we've talked about that you'll find useful later on. So, I'd love to know a bit more about you. If you're there, we'll be doing some more introductions as we go along, but while you're getting signed in, I'd love to know from you, where have you come from, which country have you been living in, where have you returned to, and how long ago did you come back? If you've been to many places, feel free to type all of those in, or just the last one, it's up to you. I'm the only one here, so I'm going to be the one who's checking the chat now and again to see if there's anything that I'd like to comment on, or comment on your comments or whatever, or questions that need answering. But please bear in mind that everyone on the call can see what you post. So don't post anything too personal unless you're happy with that going to the whole group. If you're not here with us live, excuse me, if you're not here with us live but are watching this on the replay, so you won't be able to participate in the chat box, but hopefully you'll get an idea of what people are posting and what you're seeing. So I'm just revamping things to make sure that I can see whether you're actually here or not. Let's have a look and see what's going on. Okay. So is any of you feeling somewhat overwhelmed at the moment and out of place? Go ahead and type yes and no in the comment box about that too. It's very normal to feel all over the place when you're in the midst of re-entry, as we'll be talking about in a moment. It can be incredibly uncomfortable too, can't it? If any of you found it really easy, then perhaps you should be taking this webinar instead of me. It's all too easy to think that you're the only one struggling, but I think we all struggle when we're trying to get through this whole business, which is re-entry. So for those of you that didn't catch it in the beginning, I'm not seeing anybody coming through here at the moment. I hope that everything's going okay and it's working for you, and you're able to sign up to live fire. If anybody isn't managing to do that, do send me an email or something like that so I can see what's going on for you, and to know whether you can actually hear me or not. So for those of you who didn't quite catch the beginning, I'm Helen Watts. I'm a specialist in re-entry, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. As with all webinars, there can be a bit of a delay on the line from time to time, depending on where you're listening in from. So do bear with me if I don't get to your question straight away. But I will try and get through as many of them as I possibly can. And I would love this to be as interactive as possible as well, so I don't feel like I'm talking to a silent screen, which always feels a little bit like, whoa, this is a bit odd. Do type in those questions and comments, and I'll try and get to as many of them as I can as possible. Okay, I'm still not seeing anyone coming through here, so I'm just checking my email to make sure that we're not missing anything, but there's nothing coming through there. So, okay, right, well, I shall plod on and see where we get to and see if I get some comments in due course. I do know the web server's been having some odd things going on, so hopefully it'll catch up with itself eventually. So if it's okay, I'm just going to share some of my own story to start with, so you know how I came to be doing what I'm doing now. Funnily enough, I started off life as a mechanical engineer. I spent the third year of my 4-year degree course studying in Germany and had an absolute ball. I loved the culture, the food, the people. In fact, I felt really at home there. I really struggled when I came back to the UK, despite having been warned it might not be easy. And the fact that I was only there for 1 year, I thought that after only 1 year, it wouldn't be really that difficult. I then worked in the automotive industry, but knew from day one that making something bigger and better for someone's perceived need really didn't excite me. I started to get involved in environmental work, and through that got to doing talks to large groups of engineers and answering their questions, helping people get on board with the company's strategies and getting excited about something that I was passionate about. I should have known then that I needed to do something more people-based, but I still kept up the mask. My husband and I went overseas to Kyrgyzstan and did a development course, all related to helping people own their growth and see for themselves the things that they wanted to change and act on them, rather than us telling them what we thought those were. We loved it, but we didn't have a chance to put it into practice as team conflict led us to resigning and leaving. It was a real struggle because we felt like we were called to be there long term, and yet here we were saying, actually, this isn't working, we need to go home. We had a difficult relationship with our church when we went back. It wasn't easy. They debriefed us, but not in a great way, and so we were left feeling quite hurt for a while, and it took us a while to put ourselves back together again and to get back out to Kyrgyzstan. But we ended up in a small, isolated town 5 hours outside the capital. Similar sort of place to where we started off when we were just a couple, but different end of the country. I was in the early days of being a mum and had quite an identity crisis of who I was and what I offered to the world apart from mummy brain. I was still playing at being an engineer, planning a wind turbine at a nearby collective farm where they had no electricity, but finally figured I was doing that to please my mum and not myself, so I handed the project over to the next unsuspecting short-termer. Oh, I think I missed out on a slide there. There we go. That was a development course that we were running. And there we go. That was me with my anemometer, which was measuring wind speed before we decided to put the wind turbine up in the end. So I then changed direction and spent time running parenting courses and mentoring short-term workers, which fitted me much better. Here's the last parenting course that I ran. These are my kids at the front here, Hannah and Simeon, and these are some of the ladies that I was working with. Only one of them actually had children at the time. The others, I thought, actually, this would be really useful to know for when we do get married, which is very much expected in Kyrgyz society. But then, during the year when we were planning our departure, we lived through a revolution, which left all the prisoners from the jails running riot in town, gunmen shooting randomly in the streets, and a personal threat from someone who wanted to buy our house but couldn't. At the same time as being somewhat perturbed, great English phrase, isn't it, by all this, somewhere in my brain, I knew that it was going to be a really useful experience and would help me in my future work. We left in 2010, our children 6 and 4. Here they are. Knowing that we wanted to be involved in helping others who had lived overseas to readjust when they got back. I retrained as a debriefer and a coach, something I'd never heard of because we'd been in such a backwater, and started my own business, doing something I love with people I deeply identify with. When we got back, we found that people weren't really interested in what we'd been doing, and people that we had considered friends before, or when we were back for a visit, had moved on, or we'd changed so much we couldn't relate anymore. We were thoroughly overwhelmed by the number of decisions we had made, that we had to make, from big things like careers down to the mundane like new toilet seats. We realised we had an opportunity to shape the next stage of our lives in a way that many people who stay put just don't. We could shape our future by taking time to work out where we wanted to go next and setting goals which we step by step moved towards. It made a massive difference to how settled we felt. I spent a couple of years once we got back struggling with depression, which was a culmination of a whole load of stresses piling on top of each other and unresolved childhood issues. But I learned a lot in coming through that. And I have this passion, making re-entry easier for others and helping people make the most of the opportunity presented by re-entry to reevaluate life. I do most of my work currently for individuals and NGOs such as Tear Fund, including a lot of debriefing as well as coaching. And obviously running webinars is also something I'm increasingly doing. But I'm well aware that there are many people out there who don't get the same support when they return as the charity sector gives. On the whole, the mission sector and the voluntary aid sector seem to give a lot of support when people come back. But other people, like international school teachers and corporate people, corporate wives, even get very, very little support. So my aim is to be able to reach out to those people too. So to today's session, I'm going to give an overview, but I just want to check in again and just see if I can see if any of you are on the line tonight, or whether it's just me here. If it's just me here, it's fine, because we can just record it anyway, and then you can watch it at your leisure. So I'm not seeing anybody listening here tonight, and maybe that's the case, even though none of you have been able to get in. There should be a number of people here, but obviously nobody's managed to actually listen to it tonight. So if that is the case, apologies that none of you are able to come and take part, but I hope you're able to watch this replay anyway when you get there. So I'll just have to make up some spaces then where I'm asking questions and see what happens. Okay, so the overview. Firstly, we're going to spend some time trying to understand the journey that we're on and find some markers to help us know where we are at on that journey. Next, we'll look back to the past, the road behind us, to see what we can learn for the road ahead. Thirdly, we'll look at the foundations we have in our lives, the things that give us stability, and how we can build those up. And lastly, we'll be taking a look towards the future, seeing what's ahead of us, what's coming up. For some of you, this webinar is going to be just what you need to move forward and feel more comfortable with where you are. For others, you might be looking for more, for further support. So if it's okay with you then, towards the end of the call, I'd like to share with you where you can get further support as you settle, and what that might look like, so that you can make the most out of your transition. So, the journey that we're on. This is a diagram, or something similar, we were shown when we came back in 2010. I found it so helpful because it tied in with my own experience of feeling like life was in chaos. This diagram can be used when you go abroad, as well as when you come back. But for the sake of argument here, let's just take the left-hand side as where you are once you're settled in your host country. So you probably have a role of some sort, you're adjusted to being there, contributing to the community around you, involved in various activities, and have a status or reputation, both with local people and with expat people. Whatever that might look like, it could be being the expat mum, or maybe the tough ones in an isolated location, your job, all sorts of different ways of it looking. But whatever it is, it provides you with a sense of identity, knowing where and how you fit. At some point, the decision to leave is made. If this is made for you, maybe forced upon you, it is all the harder, because there's then often little time for the goodbyes and finishing up that come next. Assuming, though, that you make the decision, and then have a year or 6 months to start thinking about going home, once you make that decision, life is never the same again. Has anyone come across Jerry Jones from the Culture Blend? He writes a lot about transition and repatriation. He did a great blog last year about the kind of 3 different distinct categories. When you first go overseas, you're a newbie. When you've been there for a while, you're a stayer. And then at some point, you probably become a goer. So you've been through that newbie phase, you've been a stayer, and now you've become a goer. Did you notice how people's attitude towards you changed once you became a goer? As soon as they knew that you were leaving, some distanced themselves from you. Others wanted to spend as much time as possible together before you leave. Others wanted all your stuff very cheaply. Kyrgyz society was a bit like that. I mean, we had dollars written over our foreheads anyway, but as soon as we said that we wanted to leave, we had all sorts of people kind of claiming favors and, oh, they've been so nice to us and therefore we should do this for this cost and all those sorts of things. Anyway, that's all in the past because you're home now. But what I wanted to get across is this. That was when the chaos started, when your identity and your rootedness started to be shaken. It wasn't just in coming back that this stuff happens. It starts before you ever leave. Does that resonate at all? So, You're in the chaos phase. By the time you actually leave, it's full on. If you've been kicked out of somewhere because of a visa issue, or the government have just decided they don't want you there anymore, or an event has happened that means you just have a few days to leave, it's all a complete whirlwind. But even if you've had longer, it means you've had more of a chance to fill up your head with to-do lists, right? So you get on that plane. This is where a boat would have been so much better. Even 50 years ago, you would have gone home on a boat and taken 4 to 6 weeks probably to do it, if not longer. Now we get on a plane and wham! Within 24 hours or less, we're on a different planet. To all intents and purposes, we look American or British or French or whatever nationality we are, but on the inside, we feel a bit like a little green alien that hasn't got a clue how things function or what's changed since we were back. So begins the repatriation chaos. To start with, we do have a hypothetical identity. We're the ones who just came back from that foreign country. But within 3 or 4 weeks, that's worn thin and people expect us to have moved on. Ha, ha, ha. It's only just the beginning. We may have lost some of our identity comes as a big issue here because we had a calling to go overseas, and sometimes people struggle when they come back because they feel like they haven't got a calling anymore. Or what is the calling for the next stage? And that can be a real big identity issue, especially in the mission community. So it's a long time using this diagram until we get to the right-hand side and start again feeling settled and involved. People say to allow 2 months for every year that you've been away, but we've known people adjust really quickly, and others who've been away only about 3 years who've taken at least 5 to feel at home again. And life sometimes has a tendency to rocket out of control really quickly in that chaos phase. We have close friends who were in South America for a number of years. They came back with their 4 kids, and in the first couple of months, they were faced with finding a nursing home for her mother. He was diagnosed with cancer. They had to get their kids into schools. They sold the house they'd been renting out and bought another one, found the new one had rotting floorboards and had to replace them, and needed to find jobs in order to be able to live. Nightmare. Sounds over the top, but I've heard so many stories like that. Maybe not quite that full on. It's not all that uncommon. I'm sure you've probably seen this sort of transition curve before. It's the sort of thing that people see in orientations all the time. So perhaps when you were going overseas in the first place. I say overseas because we're so small an island here in the UK that everything else is over a sea. Unless you count Wales and Scotland, of course, but for better or worse, we don't really count them as being particularly foreign. Sorry if being somewhere different isn't overseas for you. Bear with me. Anyway, here's the diagram, which applies equally when we go as when we return. First, the honeymoon phase, when everything is exciting and new. I came across somebody's newsletter recently, written when she'd just gone overseas, and she was so obviously in that honeymoon phase. I just wanted to share it with you. She says, "I'm sat outside on my chair in the glorious hot sunshine, distracted by the colourful birds which I'm trying to identify, and the cheeky geckos popping up all over my garden wall. I'm surrounded by beautiful trees and vibrant coloured tropical flowers. This is a beautiful place. When I arrived here, I went straight from the plane to get a local SIM card, queued to get the maximum of local currency out of the ATM, did my grocery shopping at the supermarket and the local market, all before arriving at my new home." It just radiates that initial excitement, doesn't it? We can feel like this when we first come back. We're so pleased to see people and they're pleased to see us. We have those home comforts that we've missed, or we eat that food that we hadn't been able to get for so long. But the honeymoon phase gradually, as you well know, gradually or rapidly when we come back sometimes, wanes into a more challenging phase of culture shock. Here's a quote from a different lady who had definitely moved on from her honeymoon phase. She says, "I've discovered a recently opened cinema here, a proper cinema, with popcorn and tiered seats and aircon. I watched Kung Fu Panda 2 in 3D. Amazing what you'll watch when you're desperate. I've had a lot of fun and have a great bunch of friends. However, the honeymoon period is definitely over. It hit me quite hard in my 4th month. I'm still 100% sure I'm in the right place, but it doesn't make it easy. Sometimes I crave normality. Oh, to be married, picking up kids from school and going to Tesco. Walmart for you're in a different part of the world. Does that feel familiar? Then after probably at least 6 months, if not a year or more, you reach a place of adjustment. Actually, I'd say nearer 18 months. In my experience, we certainly felt a lot more like we were starting to settle at about 18 months. And a lot of people that I've spoken to have said the same sort of thing. Do you recognize those different phases? In reality, it's never a smooth curve. I mean, when's anybody's curve been quite like that? I like this one I found on Google Images. Well, not quite like that, as I think the roller coaster gets less pronounced over time. But we found that, let me just go back to that culture re-entry curve, really helpful for our children. We drew a picture of the curve and put it on our fridge alongside some emoticons at different places, representing happy, neutral, miserable, angry, and anything that you can think of in between. From time to time, one of us would point to the curve and say, "I feel like this place today," which would prompt the rest of us to join in. It was really helpful for us as adults to recognize and affirm where our children were, and for all of us to see that all the different places were okay. Our children were quite young at that point, but I'm sure the principle could be applied for older children too. Okay, so that's the journey that we're on. The more we can understand what's behind our discomfort, the easier in some ways it is to acknowledge and accept it for what it is, rather than feeling like we should be somewhere else, or that there's something wrong with us. I'm just going to check the chat again, just in case anybody has managed to sign in. I assume that something's gone a little bit wrong with the chat, so you may well be listening and I just don't know. But write down on your piece of paper, what was the most useful bit of that section that you want to remember and take away? Okay, moving on then. I'm going to assume that something's gone wrong with the chat box, so I'll just talk to you all like you are there, but not checking the chat. So, moving on then. Using our past to help the present. We're going to think about this from 3 different perspectives. Our mindset, dealing with loss, and seeking help. This is where I'd like you to do some work. So think back to your initial transition to your host culture, the country that you moved to. What are some of the words you associate with that transition? Jot them down. Maybe things like confusion, moving, upset, excitement, all sorts of things. Just jot down whatever comes to mind. If I could get the chat box working, I'd be asking you to type things in, but never mind, another time. So what are some of those words that you associate with transition? Then I want you to think a little bit about what habits, mindsets, or resources helped you most to settle in your host country when you originally went. And write those down too. What habits, mindsets, or resources, I should be moving this on, I'm getting so involved with the chat box I'm not even seeing that. So what habits, mindsets, and resources helped you most? Remember back, it might be only 5 years or something for some of you, it might be 25 years for some of you, so it might be a bit more of a strain, but what can you think of that helped you when you originally went overseas? And third part of this, which of these, if any, might be helpful to you now? Or which of them could you tweak a bit and use the principle of to help you now? Which of these habits and mindsets that you had when you originally went out could be of help to you now as you readjust back to your home country? if any of these ideas really strike you, why don't you just underline them or something like that so you can find them at the end of the webinar, and then you can come back to them. We each have different ideas. It's a shame we can't see the chat and we can get some ideas from each other. It may be things like imposing some sort of routine to each day, or forcing yourself to see someone each day, if only for a few minutes. And maybe setting yourself small challenges for completion each day. Even getting out of the house, or assuming that you don't know how things work. What sort of things have you come up with? Let's give you another moment to think about those before we move on. Okay, I hope you've come up with one or two things that have occurred to you there that you hadn't thought about. So, done mindset, we're going to think a little bit about loss. I think loss is one of those things, you tend to think, well, I've just moved somewhere else, I haven't been bereaved or gone through a massive grieving process, but actually leaving a country is a massive grieving process, and we do go through one of those grief curves that I'm sure you've seen as well. Leaving people behind, places behind, status, identity, all those sort of things that we talked about the chaos phase, they're all related to loss. So let me ask you, what or who did you miss most from your own culture? Oh, that should be own rather than one culture when you went abroad. And how did you deal with your sense of loss? How we deal with the separation from what we know can be pivotal in how well we settle the other end. So who and what did you miss from your own culture when you went abroad in the first place? How did you deal with your sense of loss? Maybe you found it really difficult and wanted to keep in touch with people an awful lot, or maybe you just buried yourself in your work. There's all sorts of different reactions, aren't there, to how we deal with that sense of loss. And as you think back to that, in what ways did the way that you dealt with it all affect your transition? I was chatting with a couple last year who were really struggling to settle in a new location, and it turned out that they were spending huge amounts of time on social media to friends and family back home. And while this in itself is not a bad thing, I do think that too much can be a bad thing. The more time we spend in the virtual world away from our location, the more detached from it we can feel. Obviously, using social media to connect to others is an amazing thing, and it's great having Facebook groups to connect with others going through similar experiences. But I would question using it too much, because it means we're not so emotionally present in our current location. I actually advised the couple I was talking to take a break from the social media for several months, having let family and friends know that they were going to do that, obviously, but so that they could root and establish themselves. And the same can be true when we come home. Much as it's lovely Skyping and WhatsApping people the other side of the globe, it can get out of hand and stop us from being in the real world here and now. So in what ways did the way that you dealt with your loss and your feelings of loss affect your transition? And what about now? What, if anything, would you like to do differently as you deal with your losses in this transition? What would you like to change about the way that you dealt with your losses from last time that could make a difference this time? Maybe to do with social media, as I've mentioned. There's other ways and things as well, aren't there? Being more focused in being present is always a good one. I think sometimes when we leave our heart somewhere, we assume that because the pain is related to being somewhere else, we spend a lot of time in our thoughts there, rather than treating this as a new and exciting posting, if you like, coming back home. We sometimes think of it as just coming back home, but actually if we were to see it as a new posting, then it can change the way that we think about it. So what would you like to do differently as you deal with your losses this time round? Okay, I hope you've managed to get those questions written down so you can just think about them a little bit more and process them a bit more. Third in this section is seeking help. How did you do that when you arrived in your host culture? What worked? What didn't? What felt okay? What didn't? How did you seek out help? Where did you get your resources from? May have been from fellow expats, other people who had already made that transition. May have been from local people who you could ask questions of and get to know the culture and the language from. Where else did you seek out help? And what did you do in places that it didn't quite work and you weren't able to find the stuff that you needed? You know what I'm going to ask next, don't you? How are you seeking help right now? And what has been the most helpful to you? What's been helpful in the way that you've asked for help recently? And what else could you do based on what you did before? Before we move on to the section on new foundations, I wanted to just throw something else into the mix here. You know the feeling you get when you're talking about your experiences overseas and you get met with one of those glazed over looks? I should think you know it all too well. Two things to throw into the mix here for you. One is how to tell your story. If you can, come up with a 2 to 3 sentence answer to the "how was your time in wherever it was" sort of question. You get that probably quite a lot, don't you? Oh, how was it? Was the weather great? The shorter and the more quirky you can make your answer to that, the better. Then whoever you're chatting to has the opportunity to ask more questions or to go back to talking about their own stuff. And it gives you an opportunity to find out if they're interested. You would have thought the question had shown that, but no, it really doesn't. And to avoid getting the eyes glazed over stage. I remember reading the book, I don't know if anybody's come across it, by Marion Nell, Burn Up or Splash Down. Brilliant book on re-entry, just helping you to think in advance about what it's going to be like and that sort of thing. And there's a section at the back for receiving churches or family and the things that they can expect from you when you come back. And I sent this in advance to my family, my parents, to my sister. And when we got back, I had a conversation with my sister about it, and she said, "Oh, can't believe that people's eyes glazed over. How rude would that be if you're talking to them and their eyes glaze over?" I'm sure that doesn't happen very often. I said, "You wouldn't believe it. It really does." And she went on. We then went on with our conversation. We talked a bit more because she did ask some questions, and within a few minutes, her eyes had glazed over. And I just thought, "Yep, that's the way it is." And so we had to move things onto other things pretty quickly because we realised actually that it was enough. That was as much as she could take. So it gives you an indication, and it gives you some body language that you can look for, and some responses that you can look for, hopefully before you get to the eyes glazed over stage. The other thing is preparing some questions for others. So if you can prepare a couple of questions which are likely to be of interest to someone who's lived their life in your home culture. So for in Britain, it might be about football, for example, or where you are, it might be baseball or something going on in politics, children's activities, whatever it is you hear people talking about. If you can arm yourself with a couple of questions which can veer you onto something comfortable when you sense someone is losing interest, it can make a big difference. People on the whole are really quite threatened by us because they don't know what to ask. Our experience is so different, and so they find it really quite uncomfortable. And if we can put them at their ease, they're more likely to be able to come back to us as well. Great, so how are we all doing? I'm throwing a huge amount of information at you and things to take away and think about. I hope it's resonating and helping. On to new foundations. Again, this is something that was explained to us when we came home, and it made so much sense that I want you to get to grips with it too. Foundations are what help us to feel stable in our lives. Here's my little diagram of my life space when I came back from Kyrgyzstan. These were the things that had kept me stable when I was there and in a previous life, if you like. Family, career, friends, home, hobbies, spiritual life. Could be in any number of different things. They were kind of the building blocks that I could see in my life at that time. Now, when you just do a small move or move job, then maybe one of your foundations gets shaken, or possibly two. But when you come back from being overseas, the whole lot gets thrown up into the air, like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle being muddled up. Suddenly, your extended family is nearer to you than ever before and have expectations of you that you didn't realise. You don't know what you're going to do next, job-wise, or maybe you do, but maybe it doesn't feel like a great fit. You've just left a bunch of friends behind, and though you may or may not know people in your new area, it will take some time to work out who you will really relate to. You might be living out of boxes in someone else's house for several weeks, or not be able to move into your own for a while. The hobbies you found overseas may be different to what you would do with your leisure time back home. We couldn't remember what hobbies we'd done when we were in England before. We knew we'd had to kind of create different ones while we were in Kyrgyzstan, because often you just couldn't go out in an evening. So we spent a lot of our time playing cards and reading and that sort of thing together, or playing the piano. So we had to really ask ourselves, well, what did we do and what do we do? And in terms of faith, maybe you've got some big questions which your host culture brought up for you, which you don't have answers to yet, and you don't feel like your local congregation get where you're at. Do you see how suddenly all of your foundations have been shaken and moved? And until some of these things start to come into some semblance of order, that feeling of unease that you have will continue. So, your job again now. Write down on paper what you would class as your foundations. Might include some of these same ones that I've used: family, career, friends, all these sort of things. Or maybe others, such as finances, health, well-being, personal development, physical environment, fun. You know what they are for you. And write down what are your foundations. Come up with around about 6, doesn't matter if it's a few less or a few more. But what are those things that help you to feel stable at any given time in your life? Once you've got some different headings, for the purposes of this call, I want you to just pick out a couple of those areas, a couple of those foundations that you want to work with. You can do the others after the call is over and work some more on those. But think about, what are your current needs in that area? What's missing? How would you like it to be? What's hard? What would you like to change? Just have a bit of a think of what your needs really are in each, just a couple of those areas for now. If I was to have picked family, then it would have been to do with relating with my brother and my sister and their families, and also my parents, and understanding what they were wanting from us and how we wanted to relate to them and how often we wanted to see them, and the challenge of meeting up with my brother. At the time, I really hadn't had any relationship with him while I'd been away, because he's not the sort of person that communicates. So there was a bit of an unknown there for me as to what it was going to look like. And rebuilding was on my mind. So what's missing? Or how would you like it to be? What are your needs in each of those areas? And then I want you to think about 2 or 3 small things you could do in each area so you could feel like you're moving forward. It just need to be small things. Obviously, we don't have control of everything around us, so there's certain things we can't do anything about. But if we're intentional about the things that we do have control of, we can make quite a difference to how we're feeling and that state of paralysis which we can sometimes end up in when it's all too overwhelming. What 2 or 3 things could you do in one of those areas to feel like you're moving forward? And I'd encourage you to put dates to some of these things as well. When are you going to do them? Again, the more intentional you are, the more likely you are to do them. Have you got something that you can do next week? Maybe getting a pedicure, finding a new book, getting out, a date with a partner, a walk. What is it for you? What would work? What would make a difference in your life in this next week? That's something that you can take away and just work through each of these areas, your foundations, or redefine what your foundations are once you're off this call and you've got some time to think. But just try and focus in on each of them and see what you think the needs are and how you could move very slightly forward in each of them. Okay, we're getting there. We're on to point 4, looking towards the future. Are your brains full yet? Sometimes one of the scary things about coming back is how many unknowns there are in the future. If we can name some of those and acknowledge them or share them with somebody else, it sometimes helps to take the scariness out of them and then lessens the anxiety we might feel. So go ahead, look into the future. What are the things that are challenging you as you look that way right now? We've done some good looking in the rearview mirror, haven't we? Looking back and finding our space in the car right now. But if you look forwards, what are some of the more difficult bits in the road that you can see coming up? Or that maybe you can't see, you just envisage being there. What have you yet to sort out? Which difficult relationships have you yet to brave? What are the other challenging things that you might foresee over these next weeks, months, or even a couple of years? Jot some things down. What challenges can you see? When I'm in a coaching relationship with people, I can ask those questions and they can bounce them back to me, and therefore they've already shared them. In this sort of scenario where on a webinar, I would want to ask you then, who could you share those challenges with? Because it's about having somebody that you can talk these things through with, or just acknowledge them to somebody. Maybe a friend that you've got nearby, maybe somebody a distance away, somebody you can talk with over Skype. And I've been talking about not using Skype too much, but sometimes that can be really helpful, can't it? Where you've got a close friend that you can talk these things through with. And just say, this is an issue that I see coming up. I don't know an answer to yet. So what other challenges have you got that you foresee over the next few months? And who could you share them with? And then the positive, what are the opportunities that lie before you? By this, I mean, what could you do differently now you're back? What new avenues could you explore? Who could you get to know that has been on your periphery for years, but you've never had the opportunity to get to know? Who do you know who could help you? One of the things I'm really passionate about is making the most of this opportunity provided by re-entry to reevaluate our lives. So often if we just stay in one place, we get caught up in a career or life and don't stop to wonder if it's the right thing for us and whether we could be doing anything differently. Let me encourage you to use this time to dream a bit. Give yourself permission to wonder what if, without censoring that thought immediately. What opportunities are there that lie before you on the road? Ones that you've seen, or perhaps ones that you haven't seen that you can start to dream about. Again, spend some time with these challenges and opportunities once you've left this call, just to work through them. And again, talk them through with somebody else who might understand, even if they haven't come back from overseas, somebody that you feel would get some of what you're talking about. If you're creative, why not make a dream board? A corkboard or equivalent you can put pictures or words on that strike a chord with you about your hopes and dreams. Cut them out from magazines. Write them down. Draw them. Use Pinterest if that appeals. Some people love doing it on a computer. It's a great way of letting our brains run free and tell us what we've been ignoring for years. And again, that whole thing of calling, being caught up in all of this. What's God calling you on to next? Does your calling just end because you've gone back to the UK or wherever it is that you've gone back to? No, it doesn't. There's a calling on to the next thing as well. Start dreaming. Start trying to envisage what that calling, what that future might look like. So, up until now, what's been the most important thing you're going to take away from this call? Go ahead and write it down on your piece of paper now. What's had the most impact or been the most use to you? Don't write a load, just a brief comment so that you can go back to that once we finish the call, and so you'll absolutely remember that point. Got it written down? Okay. In a survey, I did a survey last year to find out what the biggest issues were of people the things that they face when they return from overseas, and the same things came up again and again and again. Things like reverse culture shock, knowing what to do with it, facing loss, bureaucracy, logistics, getting everything done, being overwhelmed by choice, not knowing how things work, feeling misunderstood, home or lack of, helping children to settle. I hope I've gone some way to give you some tools to help with many of these on this call. It's one of those things you can't deal with it all that much in an hour, but I think we touched on some of them. I haven't really touched on children, but then probably one of the biggest things we can do to help our children is to help ourselves and be honest with them about our journey too. Oh, and a word about mums, or those who are looking after the children anyway. And realise in this day and age, it doesn't always fall to the mums, but mums often suffer more culture shock later than the rest of the family. This is because they're helping the other members of their family to adjust and settle, and it can be a while later that they feel the effects themselves. Just something to bear in mind. As I mentioned earlier, for some of you, this will be more than enough to take away for now. For others of you, you're wanting to know more, have more support, and work with this stuff further. Based on this call and the results of the survey, I've come up with a series of 4 online training sessions to guide you through re-entry. So here's the plan. I'm running the Riding the Rapids re-entry course, so this is how to ride the rapids. It's going to be a series of 4-hour-long interactive training sessions online. The next course is coming up shortly in 2 or 3 weeks' time. So it's going to be running bi-weekly on the 9th of February, 23rd of February, 18th of March, 22nd of March. If you don't manage to catch it this time round, and for those of you on the replay rather than listening to this live, who might have missed February already, I'll be running another one in the autumn, so do keep an eye out for that. Again, they're going to be hour-long webinars, but hopefully more interactive, and we'll get the chat boxes working so that we can have much more of a conversation during that time. First one, we'll be talking about twists in the river, so an explanation of transition and endings, telling your story, mapping what you've learnt while you've been away. Then on to taking control of the boat, tools to help you deal with the overwhelm of settling back, the emotional effects of transition and how to work with them. Just around the river end, taking the opportunity of re-entry to dream about the future and make it reality, new beginnings and what they look like. And then navigating a safe route through the rapids, how to negotiate reverse culture shock, supporting yourself through the transition, how and when to seek help, spiritual changes, and stress. Now, as you're all, I'm sure, very much aware, it's not possible to wave a magic wand and suddenly make it all easy. And it's also not possible to listen to 4-hour-long sessions and go away sorted. These sessions will be run on the understanding that you work with the materials and get as much out of them as possible. I can't do that work for you. As I said, there will be another Riding the Rapids course in the autumn. So do get in touch if you'd like to hear about upcoming courses. And you can do that at the bottom of the Riding the Rapids page on my website, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But as well as offering the course to you, I wanted to throw in a few extras. So here they are. One is that when you're doing the course, you'll have unlimited email access to me during the course and for 2 months afterwards. That's something I normally just offer to people who have one-on-one coaching with me, who have that sort of level of support. But I wanted to offer it to those of you doing the course as well, because it won't be quite so personal as just doing one-on-one coaching. I'm going to offer you access to a library of worksheets to help you work on the exercises we'll do during the course and other materials that you might find helpful. Then some of you may already be part of this, some of you may not be or not be aware of it. I have a Facebook group called Reentry or Repatriation Stories, and it's a great place to just share stories and find some support. I've posted some very good articles there that I find all across the internet, and there's different ways of finding support in that group, chatting, dialoguing with other people, learning, talking about what you're learning, asking questions. And as part of the Riding the Rapids course, I'd love to be able to dialogue a bit about the things that we're learning in that group as well, so we can inspire some more discussion in there. So I'm told it should be worth a lot more, but I want to make it accessible to as many as possible. And when you're trying to resettle, finance is tight. So I'm just going to charge for the whole of what I've just talked about, the re-entry program, the email access, the worksheets, and the Facebook community is just going to be £60. It's equivalent to about 90 American dollars. So I'll type the registration link into the chat box so that you can go straight there. For those of you being sponsored by organisations to take part, what you'll need to do is to sign up there and be reimbursed, or get them to sign up for you and let me know who is being paid for. Let me just write that link into the chat box for you. So it's www.whatsyourpathway, oh, not quite right, pathway.co.uk / riding the rapids .html. And just check that that's right. www.whatsyourpathway.co.uk / riding the rapids.html. And just post that in so it's there. Hopefully those of you watching this afterwards will be able to see that as well, but it will come up on the presentation as well, so you'll be able to see where it is. And because I don't want anyone to be put off from making a commitment by not being sure it's absolutely worth it, which I totally believe it is, I want to offer you a 100% satisfaction money-back guarantee. I'm positive that you'll gain so much through the course and move forward a long way. We talked earlier about how you need to put the work in to make it worthwhile, but if you get through the first 2 sessions, you can see them on the replay if you don't get them live, and really feel it's not for you, then you can wing me an email and have your money back, no questions asked. Does that sound okay? I don't want you to feel like this is something that you're really stepping out to do and whatever, and you haven't got any way of coming back. So if you weren't getting on with it, you can come back to me and say, actually, this isn't working. So final details for that training course is 4 60-minute sessions starting on Tuesday, 9th of February, or as I said, for those of you watching the replay much later, then there will be some further ones in the autumn and after that as well. It'll be 8 p.m. UK time, just as this call has been, which is 3 p.m. EST, 12 p.m. PST, and 7 a.m. Australian time. It's better for questions if you can be on the call, if it's at all possible for you, and then we can interact with each other much better than we've managed to tonight for some reason. And if you know of others who might benefit from the information on tonight's webinar, do send them the link, which will be in the email with the link to the replay. Great. Well, congratulations if you feel you're going away with a plan of action and things to do differently as a result of this session, whether that's by yourself or whether you're going to be signing up for more. Really look forward to seeing some of you on the course and interacting with some of you in the Facebook groups. I'm going to stop there for now. It'd be lovely to have a question and answer, but obviously that's not going to happen tonight. So if you do have any questions, do email those to me. You will have my email address in your welcome email for the course, the webinar tonight, so do have a look for that. I'm Helen Watts. I'm passionate about making re-entry easier for people. I hope you've enjoyed the session and look forward to continuing to interact with many of you, either in person or in Facebook or on the course. All the best on your journey. Take care.